At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to Jack Dillman. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well today. Welcome to our little Softmart Microsoft webinar today. Starting with the enterprise agreement, what's changed and where do we go from here is kind of the basis of it. Again, my name is Jack Dillman, and I am a senior software licensing analyst here at Softmart, and sitting right next to me is Shelton. He is our Executive Vice President and Licensing Guru. As you can see from our main screen, we've got 4 parts to our webinar today. The 5th part will be, we will be giving a question and answer period towards the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started with part 1, and that's kind of the introduction slide. And we'll go from there. So take it away, Lane.
All right, so we thought we'd intro by just giving you a little bit of background on us so you'll know who's delivering the content today. At Softmart, our overall mission as a corporation for the last several years has been making IT easy. And although that's somewhat of a simplistic moniker, our piece of that is Microsoft licensing. So the analytics team here at Softmart, of which Jack and I are both a part, our job is to understand Microsoft licensing and make those changes and make the licensing understandable to our customer base. We really have 4 areas of focus on our team. The first is our research focus, where with staying on top of all the changes. You know, we visit a lot of the same places you visit. We have our networks of contacts that keep us in the know, but that's a big part of our job is researching so that we can stay on top of the changes. We also have an applied science function to our team, which is translating all that information into viable licensing strategies. I mean, that's the biggest part of what we do is taking what we learn, taking what we know, and helping our customers develop viable licensing strategies, you know, based on that information. Analytics is our 3rd focus area, and that is our tool set and our methodology that we use. We've created an objective, repeatable process for helping achieve optimal licensing agreements, and we call that analytics. And then the last piece of our role here at Softmart is what we call demystification, and that's transforming the sometimes overwhelming complexity of Microsoft licensing into actionable information, and that's what this call is about. So hopefully what we've done is struck a nice balance between providing just the right amount of information on these changes so that you'll be able to determine, you know, whether these are changes you need to take action on or whether this is something you need to look into without being overly simplistic or overly complex. All right, so we're going to start, you know, in our agenda we call for a brief refresher on the enterprise agreement to make sure that we're all on the same page when we start talking about the changes. But before we get to the actual enterprise agreement itself, I wanted to talk briefly to you about what's driving all the changes. So there's been 3 major trends in the computing environment over the last couple of years that have had a major impact on Microsoft licensing. The first being application and desktop virtualization. Well, really the first being server virtualization. Virtualizing has changed the landscape of the server room, and it's something that we've seen become pervasive in organizations large and small, and that's had a major impact on how servers are licensed, how the technology that those servers are serving up is consumed, as well as application and desktop virtualization, which is more of a nascent technology where, you know, it's not as mature, not as far along the curve as server virtualization, but we're seeing a lot of early adoption, we're seeing a lot of interest, we're seeing a lot of planning for, you know, the benefits of, the potential benefits of desktop virtualization are fairly well established now, and so we're seeing a lot of clients beginning to take action on that, as well as the newest comer of cloud computing, and, you know, with Microsoft making a major release with the Office 365 platform, and how that's impacted. The issue with the changes is they've happened at a very rapid pace. The computing environment has radically changed over the last couple of years, and software licensing by its nature does not like change. You know, licensing is how you pay for the technology, and, you know, for various reasons that tends to want stability versus rapid and dynamic change, and so in many cases the licensing is not able to keep up with all the technology changes, and that's where it gets tricky for clients who are trying to execute multi-year volume licensing agreements that both cover their enterprise as it exists today, and then in some way accommodates the changes that are coming to that same computing environment over the next, you know, couple of years. How do you execute a license agreement today that does both? That's a real challenge, and that's something that we wrestle with every day. So wrestling with that, we've come up with what we think are 3 guiding principles for dealing with licensing in the changing computing environment. The first of which is plan your licensing strategy in tandem with your technology strategy to eliminate those painful gotchas. Can't stress this enough. Getting the procurement, the licensing, the technology folks all on the same page at the very beginning of a technology adoption process is really key, because the licensing can have major impacts on the technology planning, just as the technology can have major impacts on the licensing. But what we caution customers, or what we tell customers to avoid, is going forward with a technology plan and then trying to retrofit the licensing, because that usually is where those gotchas lie. Second is, don't assume anything. Find an expert and keep asking questions until it makes sense. In the licensing world, there is no such thing as stupid questions, but there is definitely such a thing as stupid answers. And so, we do this routinely where, if something doesn't sound right, feel right, smell right, taste right, we will keep asking questions until we find answers that we feel are appropriate, or that we feel that match the situation we're in. Because of the changing nature of the environment, a lot of times asking questions of multiple sources is about the only way to develop effective answers. And so we encourage you to keep asking those questions until you have an answer that makes sense. And finally, watch for licensing dependencies. Microsoft's technology stack in particular has become ever more intertwined, so that if you're looking at one particular area, take SharePoint for an example, pulling a lever on SharePoint might impact your licensing strategy for SQL, for Windows, for Project, for Office, for Exchange. So the Microsoft stack is highly intertwined, and making changes in one area can cause dynamic changes in another. So being aware of where those licensing dependencies are is mission critical to developing an effective license strategy. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Jack now, who's going to talk about the enterprise agreement in general for just a few brief moments, and then we'll get into the changes.
Thanks, Lane. So we're going to kind of go back a little bit, because I'm sure everyone on the call today is not a current EA customer, or maybe you've dealt with EA or thought about it. So we want to kind of make sure we cover the basics and certain aspects of the EA before we dive into some of the major changes. So starting with what is the EA, pretty simple. The EA is a strategic volume licensing agreement that bundles key Microsoft technologies together and is based on committing elements of your organization to the Microsoft stack. The EA does run in 3-year terms. So the types of terms that the EA does, so you can have the Pro Plus, the Office Pro Plus. This is a commitment to adding all of your devices to one agreement. So the secret to the EA is you can't piecemeal things in and out if we're talking about Office, or we're talking about the Windows OS, or we're talking about any of the server cows. Everything has to be covered under your organization. There is the option in this to define whether or not there's certain affiliates that get added during that agreement. You can choose not to add them at the current time, but all that aside, it is a standardization. The objective of the EA is to cover all of your computers or your users, depending what type of EA you put together, under one umbrella. So what they call, if you would just do Office, or you just do Office and Windows, that's called a component enterprise agreement. And if you decide you want Office, you want the Windows OS, and you want all of the cows covered under that suite of server cows, it's called a full platform EA, and it does add additional benefits from the normal pricing, usually in between 12 to 15%. Servers and applications under this are voluntary, and as we put based on usage. This means that you do not have to commit every server in your organization under that agreement. You don't have to put everybody on Project. You don't have to put everyone on Visio, and any of the other applications are completely voluntary as to what you'd like to do. So again, this is to touch on the big three. The component EA is an EA containing one or more of the big three, which are listed at the top. The full platform is the EA of all three. Software assurance, if anyone is not familiar, software assurance is basically not just a maintenance package, as people like to say, and it's not just, well, that's what we pay to get the new version as it releases. That's all true, but the main part of software assurance is also there's additional benefits that Microsoft is giving to you included in that price that will allow you to almost utilize these things more and more often. Microsoft basically helps you pay for certain things to get you ramped up and running quicker, which are the software assurance benefits. Okay, how does the EA work? Here are the characteristics. EA is annual payments. There are 3 equal payments for your customized bundle. This is a way for Microsoft to say, we know that when you add software assurance, it increases the cost of the license over the 3-year period. What they allow you to do is to basically split that overall cost over the 3 years with no interest and the ability to pay it 3 times instead of everything up front. Annual true-up. The true-up is basically if you're into your agreement and you add seats and you add certain licenses, you can download those licenses during that year. You have the ability to download basically every product that they have on their website. It's before your next year's payment when you have to make your true-up. This is the ability to basically add those licenses in during it without changing the contract in any way. Transitions, moving elements from on-premise to the cloud. This is a new region here. This is a new thing that Microsoft has thrown out there, and you're going to hear a lot about Office 365, which is their cloud component. So it's the ability to have Microsoft host, all still done under the EA, and they've given you a nice ability that if you're a current software assurance customer, they've made it pretty easy for you to be able to focus your attention on them hosting it and transition them to the cloud very easily. Price band is set by a number of seats, and we have the minimum equals 250, but I'll touch a little bit more on that later. You don't necessarily have to be 250 to be able to take advantage of the EA. And the final thing are the flavors. It's perpetual licensing or subscription-based online licensing. We wanted to pinpoint some of the benefits of the EA. One is cash flow. It's a very predictable yearly annual payment. You can tell what you're going to pay. Anything additional, you would have to kind of plan your true-ups, and that would be a little bit more on that end, but Softmart is happy to help with those true-ups and being able to actually track them and make that a little bit more predictable also. Second is best discounts. Aside from open charity, the enterprise agreement is the best pricing Microsoft offers on volume licensing with software assurance. Locked pricing, this is a huge benefit. In most cases, I don't know any software vendor that doesn't raise their prices every year. And what the EA allows you to do is you're signing a locked-in contract for 3 years. Your prices are locked in, and you do not fall change to any price increases. And the fourth, and I think the best part of the EA is it's easy to manage. It's one umbrella. You can easily see what you own, what you're downloading. It's a pretty seamless process to be able to do it, and it certainly makes IT professionals' lives a bit easier. There are risks with everything. So risks that we wanted to point out is the EA for what you're spending with the investment software assurance would, in our eyes, require brisk upgrade trajectory. This means you're paying for the new versions as they come out as part of that software assurance package. We've seen it would really be beneficial for you to be able to move to those versions faster as opposed to, say, it's 2011 and we're still running Office 2003. If that's the case and you want to kind of change that and get to a better, more rapid upgrade process, the EA would be a good option for you. If you're not on that type, that's a risk that you want to start to think about, and we can certainly help pinpoint and show you the numbers to see, is it a good fit, is it not? Bundling may equal shelfware. This means that, in a sense, obviously during that 3-year period, you're not always increasing in size. Sometimes companies may decrease in size. Sometimes you may over-license with the expectation to grow, but maybe the growth isn't there at that time, which means you may be paying for licenses that you're going to be sitting on the shelf waiting for a later day.
And one other thing on that shelfware, in addition, the CAL suites that come with the enterprise agreement, they have a lot of CALs in them, and so if you're not using those CALs, there's always a calculus to be had with, if I use this many in this bundle, then I'm getting the full value of the bundle, even if I'm not using those components. But it's something that you want to watch, because if you adopt, say, an enterprise CAL suite, but you're only using 30% of that suite, then you might be, losing value by being in an enterprise agreement. So it's one of those things where you have to pay attention to the bundles and make sure you're approaching that calculus of usage that gets the value of the bundle. So that's why we say if you're buying a bundle and you're not using a certain percentage of that bundle, that shelfware could become a liability. All right. So the value calculus. So this is our attempt to sort of distill down into its core essence who might benefit from an enterprise agreement. Obviously, we would never say somebody would or wouldn't without doing a more in-depth analysis, but this is kind of early indicators that this is something that might be worth pursuing or might not be worth pursuing. First and foremost are the big two. You have to have at least 180 seats, and the EA is set for a 250-seat minimum. There are exceptional circumstances where cost savings can be achieved by an organization between 180 and 250 seats, but it's a very narrow band. So it's one of those things where if you answer yes to a lot of these questions, but you're not quite 250 seats, it doesn't necessarily rule it out. It does mean that the stars kind of have to align perfectly for it to be a savings, but it's still worth looking into, because if the stars stars do align for you, we have definitely underwritten enterprise agreements where, if you compare buying those licenses ad hoc via an open license program or a select license program versus a 3-year enterprise agreement, there's direct and measurable cost savings. So again, I don't want to say if you're less than 250 seats, don't think about it. I'm just saying it's kind of a long shot, but sometimes long shots pay off.
Actually, we have a really good question that just came in. Actually, there's two. So I want to kind of revert back. The first question is, what does CAL stand for? I apologize. I should have, you get caught in the lingo a little bit. CAL stands for Client Access License. And what it means in the Microsoft world is, in order for you to access, let's say, a Windows server or Exchange, you have to have the proper license to be able to access that server, to be compliant, legal, and to have the rights. So when we say CAL, there's a suite of products under the EA, which I said was the core CAL suite. It actually is comprised of 6 products, and it's the Client Access License for Exchange, which is email, Windows Server, which is basically pretty much every server you're probably running except for maybe some of your virtuals, Link Standard CAL, which is the IM and presence. So that would be if you have an internal IM system that you speak back and forth and you let everybody know, hey, I'm busy, do not disturb, things like that. That's the presence. Link has also been expanded to a lot more, so there's a lot of information there. If you want to know more about Link, let us know. We can kind of fill you in. Link has multiple CALs. The fourth one is Forefront Endpoint Protection. This is a new one along with Link that's been added to the suite. Forefront Endpoint Protection is actually the desktop antivirus solution from Microsoft. And it's actually a pretty good product. It runs very seamlessly through all of your systems, and it works very well. So that's been included now. The fifth component is System Center Configuration Manager, which is the ability to basically monitor. It does software asset management in a sense. You're able to push Microsoft patches out to your computers and also monitor your systems for health and well-being, let's say. And the final one is Exchange CAL, and this is your email. So it's the ability for you to actually be able to access your email and go through it. So when I reference the CAL suite, the core CAL, that's what I'm talking about in those 6 particular products. Thanks, Lynn.
All right. So we talked. The second of the big questions is are you philosophically okay with software assurance? And software assurance is not right for every organization. If you upgrade your software once every 7 years, probably you're better off just buying the licenses and not bothering with software assurance. But if you upgrade your software, say anywhere from 3 to 5 year time frame, software assurance may be a good bet. Software assurance, there are people that love it, there are people that hate it. You have to be philosophically okay with it to look at an enterprise agreement because it is an enterprise-wide software assurance commitment. Another factor, another variable to the value calculus is that you have a big 3 upgrade planned in 18 months, meaning if you plan to upgrade Office, if you plan to upgrade Windows, if you plan to upgrade Exchange or SharePoint or adopt Link, if you have any of those upgrades on your roadmap for the next 18 months, an enterprise agreement in some form or fashion may be a viable alternative. You're virtualizing in the data center or plan to, can't stress this enough. If you're virtualizing in the data center, Microsoft has licensing programs that accommodate and empower that virtualization strategy. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. You're implementing virtual desktops or rolling out thin clients. You're considering a cloud for your next deployment, or SQL is a strategic part of your organization. The equation that we want to leave you with today is if you answered yes to number 1 and at least 2 of the others in this list, then the EA might be the right way for you to go. Again, only, and Gartner, Directions, Forrester will say the same thing. Only a detailed analysis that puts real hard numbers to these assumptions and objective facts behind it is going to reveal whether or not the enterprise agreement is the right way to go. But if you answer yes to number 1 and you answered yes to 2 of any of the others, it's a distinct possibility that there might be value in an enterprise agreement for you. If you want to put a little bit more meat on these bones, we're going to give you an email address at the end of this where you can just ask us for our EA viability assessment. It's just a simple 6-question test, but it looks simple, but it's not. There's a lot of thought that's gone into how those questions are constructed, and they're probing questions on your environment, your computing environment that will give you a score. It'll give you a recommendation. It'll give you some next step ideas for what you need to be what you should be considering. All right, so that's the value calculus for the enterprise agreement. Now we're going to go into talking about changes to the enterprise agreement. All right, so we've got major changes coming up, and Jack's going to talk about those.
Sure. So the first one there are new enrollment options. The first is the enrollment for application platform, and the second is the enrollment for core infrastructure. These are kind of separate, almost EAs, or enterprise agreements, that have been created for certain types of Microsoft technologies that allow you to upgrade and advance your systems, not just in an easier way, but a more cost-effective way. Microsoft has really put some good ideas together to offer not just additional discounts, but to give you more for your money if you do them under these certain programs. And Lane's going to get into both of those programs here in a few minutes. The next portion is the new software assurance benefits package. New SA benefits aimed at accommodating emerging tech trends and why this is important to the big picture.
So we're also going to focus on that. And then I wanted to talk briefly about a maturing trend that we're seeing in licensing today that you need to be aware of. So in the past, licensing choices have been somewhat binary. Either you're in the program, you're out of the program. You have software assurance, you don't have software assurance. You buy your license this way, you buy your license that way. Choices have been somewhat binary. That's been been challenged by the fact that most computing environments are not, homogeneous organizations. You have certain types of users that perform certain tasks. Take a hospital, for example. You may have a base of knowledge workers, doctors, people in finance, etc. You may have, clinical workers, and they have very different computing needs. The knowledge workers tend to need office. They have heavy software requirements. Clinical workers may share desktops and require only access to line of business type applications. So the licensing has become more cognizant, shall we say, of these types of these heterogeneous computing environments where you have different types of users. The most salient example of that we've seen in recent months is Microsoft's release of Office 365. With regular Office, you have Pro and you have Standard. With Office 365, you have 4 different plans. You have the E1 plan, E2 plan, E3 plan, E4 plan. You have the K1 plan, the K2 plan, then you have a whole bunch of other plans, on top of that. So Microsoft has provided a panoply of choice for the customers to construct a licensing agreement that is well tailored to the actual computing environment, and that's a new and important trend. And one of the things we encourage our customers, whether you're in an Office 365 scenario or not, is to really look at your computing environment and look at your licensing agreement and where is their alignment and where is their potential misalignment, and then working with your LAR, working with Microsoft to make sure that your licensing agreement, as best as possible, accurately reflects your computing environment. There's a lot of cost savings that can be had by doing that, and so we're seeing a lot more of that lately. And the Office 365 is sort of the cornerstone of that emerging philosophy of, let's not give our customers 2 choices. Let's give them many choices and let them construct a licensing agreement that best suits their environment. So that's a maturing trend we see in licensing, one we hope that will continue, and we encourage you all to make sure that as you're looking at licensing agreements, don't automatically assume that you have binary choices. And then this is something that we're going to talk about in our next webinar, but the whole cloud transition in Office 365. Transitioning to, all that you need to know at this point is that transitioning to the cloud, if that's in the cards for you or if that's something that you're thinking about, doing it from an enterprise agreement is superior to doing it from consuming it from Microsoft's website directly. Microsoft has bundled in a ton of benefits, some with some pretty serious cost savings impacts, to transitioning to the cloud from an enterprise agreement or through an enterprise agreement. So if you're thinking about cloud, don't just think of it as, I'm going to go start requisitioning users directly from Microsoft's website. Talk to us, look at what it would look like under an enterprise agreement too, because there's a lot of cost savings to be had there. And ancillary to that, as Microsoft changed the enterprise agreement contracts and started embedding in language to accommodate transitions, there was one change to the way true-ups are reconciled. And that is that true-ups used to be due at the time of your agreement anniversary. So for those of you that have EAs, your true-up was due when the anniversary rolled about, and now those true-up counts are due 60 to 30 days prior to that anniversary. Now, if you have an existing contract, your contract didn't change, but if you sign a new contract or sign a renewal, your true-up counts are going to be, the payment structure is still the same, but the counts are going to be due 30 days prior to the anniversary, so you'll want to accelerate your timeline for reconciling your annual true-ups. Okay. Do we have questions? Okay. All right. So now we want to talk about those 2 new enrollments, because these are huge Microsoft, they're probably the biggest 2 changes that have come to Microsoft licensing since they rolled out the EA years ago. And the first is the enrollment for application platform. So I always preface this by saying under the right conditions, because these are conditional programs. They work exceedingly well for those who meet the right conditions, and they, maybe they're not the best alternative if you don't meet the conditions. So under the right conditions, the EAP provides a strategic licensing vehicle for customers that want to commit to Microsoft's development platform. And that development platform consists of SharePoint. It consists of SQL. That's the biggest part of this is SQL. It consists of Visual Studio, which is Microsoft's MSDN product for development teams, and BizTalk. So all of those products are addressed by the Enrollment for Application platform. The agreement itself runs just like a regular enterprise agreement in many respects. It's a 3-year contract. It's self-contained in that you don't have to have an enterprise agreement to have an EAP. Your EAP doesn't have to run coterminous with your enterprise agreement if you don't want to. You can pretty much pick up and sign an EAP anytime you want to, as long as you have some kind of underlying select or enterprise agreement. If you don't, then you can sign an underlying select contract just to get yourself into an Enrollment for Application platform. So if you're heavy users of any of these products, the EAP might be an option. The benefits of the Enrollment for Application platform, first and foremost, it provides discounts for new purchases. Those discounts, you'll hear things bounce around from 10 to 40%. You know, our analysis, and this is also backed up from analysis by Gartner and directions on Microsoft, you're going to see discounts of effective discounts between 10 to 25% versus what it would cost to acquire those licenses and software assurance via an enterprise agreement. So it takes the enterprise. We did say, we're contradicting ourselves a little bit. We said the enterprise agreement was the best pricing, but for new license purchases that are for products in the EAP, they're actually discounted below the enterprise agreement, effectively between 10 and 25%. You have 2 different true-up options under the EAP, so you basically lock in your initial licenses, and then you can elect to either true up every year, just like as an enterprise agreement. So the true up is simply, you start at point A, whatever you added beyond A in that year, you pay for at the beginning of year 2. So you're doing an annual true up just like you would under any normal enterprise agreement, with the exception of you're getting pretty good discounts on those true ups. Or you can elect the fixed growth rate option, which is where basically your annual payment increases 20% every year. And at the end of that 3-year term, if you've exceeded that 20% growth rate, you just pay a balloon payment for that at the end. So it's if you know you have slow and steady or rapid growth of SQL and think you're going to meet or exceed the 20% threshold, then that's a potential option. We don't see a lot of the fixed growth options, but we do see a lot of the annual true ups. Okay. License resurrection. So for lack of better words, license resurrection, under the, with Microsoft, when they eliminated upgrades several years ago, if you don't have software assurance active on that license and a new version comes out, you got to buy a whole new license. That's been, a rule enshrined in Microsoft licensing for many years. However, under the EAP, you have the ability to skip buying new licenses if you have old versions out there and just buy software assurance to get those licenses current and keep them current. So let's say you have a whole bunch of SQL 7 licenses out there. Maybe you're still running line of business applications, but you're preparing for an upgrade. This might give you a pathway to apply software assurance to those licenses so that you can upgrade them to the most current version and keep them current without having to incur an additional licensing charge. So that licensing resurrection can be a pretty powerful plus to the EAP. And lastly, there's a pretty high spend threshold to qualify for this, but if you do qualify, you do get free tech support on SQL. It is quality tech support, very similar to Premier, and we have a lot of Premier customers that have taken advantage of this to free up their Premier dollars for other things. So, if you meet that spend threshold, then you're going to be getting free reactive tech support for SQL. The fine print, because everything's got fine print. First and foremost, there are minimums to qualify in each product, but they are not onerous. So, if it's SQL Server, you got to buy 5. You got to put a minimum of 5 in the program. If it's Visual Studio, you got to put a minimum of 20 developers in the program. If it's SQL CALs, you've got to put a minimum of 250. So I didn't list out all. We've got a list of resources at the end where you can go get all the exact details on what those minimums are. But they're not onerous. They're not things that would be a barrier to somebody who's strategic enough on that product that they're even thinking about an EAP. Second, it requires that you could cover your complete environment. I put a star by this because I wanted to make sure I make this clear. The EAP is a commitment to the Microsoft, what they call the application platform. What you're committing in the EAP is to covering basically your entire active environment. So, if you're in a situation where you carry a lot of software assurance on SQL today, and you have a lot of old, say, SQL servers that you don't want to upgrade, if you went into the EAP, you would be upgrading them. So it's something that you want to take into account. This is a commitment of pretty much your SQL active environment to this platform. So that's something to be aware of. It's not something to be afraid of, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And then lastly, resurrected licenses are only subscriptions. So if you take those old SQL 7 licenses and bump them up to the current version by skipping the license, what you're basically doing is renting those future versions. If for some reason you terminated the program, those licenses would revert back to their original version. That sounds a little harsh at first, but if you think about it, if you're committing to the platform anyways, really the only likelihood that you would ever want to be off the platform is if you were dumping the technology altogether, in which case, who cares if those licenses revert back, because you're going to get rid of them anyways. So, we don't see any of those in the fine print as, as barriers to investigating this as a possibility. They're just things that you need to be aware of. Questions? Okay.
We have multiple questions.
Okay, you want to pause? Sure. All right, let's do it.
First question is, can I move products from my current EA to an EAP?
Yes, you can. Yeah, the answer is yes. It takes a little licensing gymnastics, and you have to work with we'll have to work with Microsoft to put the numbers behind that, but the answer is yes, you can.
Next one, does EAP still have a 250-seat threshold?
For CALs, yes. Servers, no. Servers, it's like 5 for SQL servers, 5 for SharePoint servers, but the 250-seat threshold is for SQL CALs.
Next question I can cover for Frank. Frank, the EES, the question is, what is the difference between the EES, which is the Enrollment for Educational Services, to the Enterprise Agreement? The EA is strictly for corporate customers. The EES is still the best way to buy if you're an education customer or you were in a previous campus agreement. What they did with the EES is they allowed you, instead of licensing per person, that you can now actually license, there's a formula, by a full-time employee, which in the end we've seen save customers some money. So there will be some contact information at the end of this. Please feel free to reach out to us for any questions aside from EA or anything else that you need. We're definitely happy to help you with that. So Frank, I hope that helps.
All right, what's next?
Regarding reversion on resurrected licenses, is that true for government organizations also?
That I think it is, but I'm not entirely sure. We will get back to you. We'll publish an answer on that, and we'll publish an answer on that. All right.
That covers it for now.
Okay. All right. So the value calculus. Again, we're going to go back to the value calculus. What are the conditions under which an EAP might make sense? And again, I say might. Oh wait, do we have one other question?
I'm waiting for the page to load.
Okay. Okay. So we're waiting.
A little bit of a lag.
No, we're getting a lag here. Is it loaded yet? Can you see that? Did we lose the screen? Oh, there we go. Oh, okay, there we go. All right. So first and foremost, again, this is a software assurance-based program. Everything you're rolling into the EAP is going to have software assurance, and will stay on software assurance as long as it's part of the EAP. So, first question to say is, do I see value in having software assurance? If the answer to that is yes, then read on. The next two conditions, number one, your SQL environment will grow steadily over the next 3 years. If you see your SQL environment growing steadily, SQL licenses are not cheap. Microsoft is, every time there's a new SQL release, there's some kind of major change that goes along with that. We expect Denali to be no exception to that rule. There will most likely be changes. We're predicting unofficially that we will see changes possibly to how virtualization is virtualization rules are applied. And we probably expect a price increase because there's usually a price increase with a new release of SQL. So if you're, locking in the pricing with the EAP can be a good way to migrate through a new version. So if your SQL environment will grow steadily over the next 3 years, excellent. Yep. Okay. Next, your SQL environment will grow quickly over the next 18 months, and you want to push those costs out further in time. So if you're, if you're planning a major growth, remember, you can adopt that fixed growth rate where you're paying for a slow and steady growth rate over time, and then it balloons at the end. So if you're looking to find a way to heavily expand your SQL footprint today, but push those costs out towards the end of that contract, looking at an EAP with that 3-year fixed growth rate might be a good option so that you'll be paying for slow and steady growth, even though you're experiencing heavy growth, and then you'll push that cost out to the very end of the contract. And third, if you already have SA on your SQL licensing and you think you might need even just a few licenses over the next 3 years, if you already have SQL under SA, or you already have any of the other EAP products under SA. The cost of renewing SA into an EAP is exactly the same as doing so on an enterprise agreement. So there's no downside other than the requirement to cover your entire organization with software assurance for that, for those products. There's no downside to migrating to an EAP. What you will get is the upside of every new license that you purchase or true up under the program is going to be at a substantial discount. So if you see yourself, you're going to be steady state on SQL for the foreseeable future, you think that might grow over time, there's really no harm in looking at an EAP as an option, because the worst case you're going to pay the same. The best case you're going to reduce your future costs. And lastly, you have old SQL versions without SA and plan to upgrade them over the next few years. Again, that license resurrection option might be a good thing for you. So if you said yes to one and any of those other 4 items, then it's probably worth it to get an analysis done on on your environment to determine whether an EAP is a good fit. Okay, question? Yes.
Okay, so the first one is, say you're leasing assets and activating licenses, but after sending leased machines back, how do you get your activations back?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the situation is you're leasing systems. Who's owning the license? You're leasing the systems and you're activating your own. You maintain ownership of the licenses during the lease?
Yeah. Garrett, the question was for you. I know you're muted out right now, but we're going to give you some contact info at the end. Reach out to us afterwards, and we'll help you figure out that scenario. The next one is, can you explain how does virtualizing SQL licenses look like today?
So that's something. What we'll do is we're going to have another webinar specifically on SQL virtualization. We were going to do it before this one, but we anticipate there's going to be some rule changes around Denali, so we're kind of hesitant with sort of on the eve of the release of Denali to go super deep into it, knowing that things may change. I would say for the purposes of this, so we can get through the rest of our content, give us a contact afterwards. We'll get together. We'll have a separate call, and we can go through the licensing, the virtualization rules for SQL. In the Microsoft stack in general, virtualization rules are fairly accommodating, except in 2 areas. Number 1 is Windows Server, and number 2 is SQL Server. So you're asking the right question, because the SQL virtualization rules have some tricky elements to them, and it's worth discussing. But it's an hour discussion in and of itself. Yes, question.
This is a great one, and I'll cover this one. Devin, the question is, if you're already committed within your 3-year SA licensing, do you have to wait until your renewal date to upgrade to EA? Absolutely not. What we do is we look at, and it's really you're kind of that focal customer who maybe you've invested money already, but you think the EA might be a better plan. So the 2 pluses to this are, 1, we get you into a better plan that kind of gives you more for your money, especially on the SA side, and maybe getting you into licenses. The second part is the Microsoft reps will actually prorate what you've already spent on software assurance and licenses into that new agreement. So if you've already made 2 years of payments, when we get into that, you actually wouldn't have to make a payment on those existing licenses, let's say until probably the 3rd year of the EA, because you've already paid for a portion of the first 2. So no, not at all. You do not have to wait until your current agreement is up. If you're in, say, an open value or a select buying software assurance, we can help get you into the EA, and you won't have to rebuy any of what you've already paid for.
Okay. All right, so now let's flip to the ECI. The ECI is the Enrollment for Core Infrastructure. And again, under the right conditions, this is a strategic licensing vehicle that addresses Windows Server and the System Center family. It is aimed squarely at giving you better control over your virtualization strategy for the data center, as well as the management of those hosts and VMs. The ECI consists of all 3 flavors of Windows Server, so your Windows Server Standard, your Windows Server Enterprise, and your Windows Server Data Center, plus the management of those systems via the Microsoft System Center family, which is the Configuration Manager, that's their asset management product, Ops Manager, Operations Manager, which is their performance monitoring tool, Data Protection Manager, which is their backup solution, Service Manager, which is a newcomer, which is in Gen 1 now, but there will be a new release next year, a Generation 2 release next year. Service Manager is their help desk product, Virtual Machine Manager, and then Forefront Security for those servers. So what this does is it basically says if you have a data center, so you've got say you've got some hosts in a cluster, they're managing multiple VMs, they're managing multiple Windows Server VMs. Microsoft has created a licensing vehicle that takes the software assurance for those Windows servers and combines that with the System Center family of products. So in one SKU, you can get something that covers both the virtualization activity as well as the management of those VMs, and that's what they call the ECI. The ECI licenses everything on the processor model. So today, Windows Standard and Enterprise are licensed per server, right? You stand up a server, you buy a Windows Server license. If you put a VM in a host cluster, you assign a Windows Server Standard or Enterprise license to the host machine to which that VM is assigned to cover that VM. Windows Data Center is licensed per processor, and that provides unlimited VMs on the host to which it's assigned, and that is licensed per processor. So today, Standard and Enterprise are per server, Data Center is per processor. Under the ECI model, everything is processor. And the reason for that is because it gives you sort of one thing to count, right? You're not trying to count processors and servers. You're just counting processors. Everything's licensed by the processor model. So you've got the server licenses, you've got the management, you've got the security, and you've got the scale for virtualization all packed into one license. That's the ECI. All right, the benefits of the ECI, what I really like about the ECI is this is not an all-or-nothing commitment, right? You do not have to put your entire Windows Server stack under the ECI. You can pick and choose what you want to do. So you can really tailor this to, there are minimums, obviously, and we'll get to that in the fine print, but you can really tailor this program, specifically to not just your organization. I mean, we're working with a bank right now, and they're really looking at ECI for their data center, but all their branch servers, they don't want to put in those are just physical servers. They run line of business applications. They do their thing, and they do it well. Those have no business in their ECI, but all the stuff that they're doing in their data center is they build these massive host clusters for their VMs that they want in the ECI. So
physicals versus cores.
Physical.
It is physical processors.
Yes, it is physical processors. It is not core based. So it's not an all or nothing commitment. Secondly, you can mix and match, right? So you can license standard, you can license enterprise, you can license data center. So the ECI has a lot of flexibility built into it to allow you to construct it just to suit you, just to suit the elements of your data center that you really want to cover in this program, and it doesn't then put a bunch of other commitments on top of you. So this is a very flexible licensing program. Question.
Can you convert your existing server licenses, non-SA, to ECI?
Well, you can't. Sort of. I mean, by converting them, you're going to be buying ECI licenses, which is a combination of the server license and the System Center family. It'll be like buying a new license because you don't currently have software assurance today. However, that may or may not be a barrier to looking at an ECI for you, simply because there's a new version of Windows Server coming out. I don't know what version you're on today with those servers, but let's say you're running 2008, not 2008 R2. 2012, according to our predictions, is going to roll next year. So it's almost like if you were going to have to buy 2012 anyways for your next upgrade, the ECI, you're going to have to buy the license again anyways. So the answer is if you have software assurance, you can roll those in. If you don't have software assurance, it is like buying a new license, but if you time it the right way, you were kind of going to do that anyway, so this is maybe a more effective way to do that. All right? Simple count of processors. Again, easy to manage the licensing. Hey, I have 7 hosts in my cluster. They have 2 procs each. I need 14 licenses of data center. That's really about as complicated as the calculations get for what needs to go into the ECI. So it does create a fairly substantially easier way to manage licensing. I mean, if you're interested, we wrote a white paper a couple of months ago that in nauseating detail explained the rules behind Windows Server virtualization licensing. It's a class that we routinely teach to customers around the country. The rules are not, they're there, and a lot of customers are not aware of how the licensing works for Windows Server. So, again, reach us via email. We'll be happy to send you that white paper so you can see, how the licensing applies in the virtual environment. And cost savings. If you buy into the ECI Vision, if you're interested in System Center or using System Center, any of those components, and you're looking to virtualize, or you're heavily virtualized, or you're looking at software assurance on your Windows servers, that's sort of the ECI Vision. The ECI Vision is giving you one license that gives you the server and a single pane of glass to manage those servers through the System Center tools. If you buy into that vision, the licensing is going to be less expensive than the components, almost guaranteed. All right, so obviously there's fine print. Minimum of 50 processors to qualify. So, that's a threshold that's fairly easily achievable for most organizations. If it seems like a big number, again, don't be afraid of it, because there are ways to accommodate that number. Even if what you would consider putting into the ECI doesn't quite reach 50, there are ways to do that we can walk through. You need to have at least be using at least, or plan to use at least 2 of the System Center components to get the full value of the bundle. In most cases, customers are really interested in Configuration Manager and Ops Manager, but you need to have the ECI, and to get the full value of it, you've got to be using or plan to use at least 2 of those components. So if you're just doing Windows Server and virtualization and just System Center Config Manager, ECI is going to be more expensive. But if you're doing System Center Config Manager and System Center Ops Manager or Virtual Machine Manager, there's a really high probability that you'll be able to get all that plus all the other stuff for cheaper than just buying the Windows Server and the System Center Config Manager and Ops Manager on its own. So the calculus is, if you're using or plan to use 2 of those System Center components, ECI is worth a look. And it's best to perform a full licensing analysis of the virtual and physical environment to nail down exactly what should be included and at what level. There is a ton of misconception out there about how licensing works for Microsoft Windows Server in a virtual environment. We see this for SQL as well, but SQL is not as heavily virtualized yet as Windows Server. Windows Server has very specific rules, and we'd be happy to go through that on another webinar, or send you our white paper and have a conversation with you. But we always recommend doing a full analysis, and we have a template for that that's very easy. You plug in your physical server information, you plug in your virtual architecture, and from that we can really drill down and say, okay, this is the best way for you to license all these servers. Okay, do we have a question?
Yep, so we're trying to take care of some questions here throughout the presentation, because in case we run short of time at the end of this, we want to make sure we get everything answered. The first one is from Dan. Can I step up a standard or enterprise, or standard to enterprise or enterprise data center during the EA? Yes, you can. So it's called a data center or an enterprise step up. It has to be active software assurance, because what you're stepping up is the actual software assurance to that license. If it's during the current agreement, you would true up that payment. What it would then do is allow you to basically have the rights of that, and then at your renewal, you would renew that license as, say you went from enterprise to data center, you would then renew as data center software assurance, and the enterprise license would disappear. You would now be licensed for data center for whichever you stepped up. Next question, are there enterprise and workgroup versions of System Center Virtual Machine Manager like in the old days?
There is a workgroup version of Virtual Machine Manager. In fact, I just saw it in somebody's MLS a couple of days ago. It's not something I'm real familiar with, but hit us offline with a question, and we'll get you a list of everything that's in the active stack right now. It was a contract. It was an older contract, so I'm not sure if the work group is still there or not.
The next one is, there's a request for the template for virtualization and the virtualization white paper. We'd be happy to email those out. At the end, again, there's going to be contact info. We'll give you the heads up right now. Analytics@softmart.com will be your contact point for all of us. It goes to the entire team here, and we'd be happy to send you all any information that you want from this call and answer any additional questions.
Right. All right. So the value calculus for ECI, when may it make sense? All right. So the variables to our calculus, like we said, you have to have 50 processors worth of Windows servers, or at least have 50 procs between your physical Windows servers and host machines. And again, Microsoft licensing rules for Windows Server apply at the host layer. You are not buying licenses for VMs. You are buying licenses and covering those VMs by assigning them to host machines regardless of what you're using for the hypervisor. So whether you're using Hyper-V, whether you're using ESX, the rules are the same. So you got to have at least 50 procs between your physical Windows servers and your host machines to qualify. And the other major piece of the value calculus is you're using or plan to use System Center components to manage your servers, right? This is a combination of System Center and Windows. It requires you to use both if you're going to get the value. From it. Lastly, you're considering Windows Data Center Edition for your virtual clusters. Again, that is a key marker right there, that you're going to probably end up needing software assurance for those data center licenses. It's almost always a good bet to have software assurance, at least on the data center licenses. And it might be worth it to take a look at the System Center 2012 family of products coming down the pipe next year to see if System Center entices you in any way if you're not using it today. But definitely, if you're looking at data center, 2012 of System Center might be worth a look at. So there might be some value through the ECI for that. And you have virtual clusters but don't have any data center licenses. If you have heavy virtual clusters, like let's say you have a four host cluster managing 30 VMs, and you have vMotion turned on, or you have, if you're using Hyper-V, you have live migration turned on. If you don't have data center licenses, chances are you probably need data center licenses because of the way that the virtualization rules work for a Windows server. So right now, if you have virtual clusters but don't have any data center, there's a high likelihood that you might need data center. The good news is, if you do, it's gonna benefit you. It's not something that's that's a painful gotcha. It's usually something that has a happy ending. But if you don't, and you're going to have to look at data center anyway, you might as well look at the ECI at the same time to see if it makes sense. All right. And so the equation is, if you answered yes to 1 and 2, ECI is worth a look. If you answered yes to 1, and 3 or 4, it still may be worth a look. Again, not quite as strong a value proposition, but it may be, and it doesn't hurt to look, right? There's no harm in looking. All right, so that's EAP and ECI. All right, what we're going to talk about next is software assurance benefits. So, these are the benefits Jack alluded to. There's a suite of benefits that come when you are a committed software assurance customer in some form or fashion, whether that's through an enterprise agreement or a select agreement. The size and scope of your SA benefits package is determined entirely by how much money you're spending and what agreement you're using. But the benefits package, the types of benefits you have access to have changed in the last 18 months. There's been some pretty significant changes to those SA benefits, and Jack's going to walk us through what those changes are.
Sure. So, Windows VDA. This is the free VDA subscription to support virtual desktops. The qualification to receive this software assurance benefit is you have to have your Windows OS covered under software assurance. So if you have a Windows EA or you have an open value where you cover your Windows licenses, it gives you the rights to Windows Enterprise, and it also gives you the Windows VDA, which means basically you're licensed properly through Microsoft to be able to virtualize your desktop. Office roaming. This is the remote virtual desktop access for Office, Project, or Visio. Qualification, you have to have Office Pro Plus covered under the active software assurance. Again, this would also count if you're using, say, Office Standard and you're covering that under maybe an open value or select. It's the same, but since we're talking about EAs today, Office Pro Plus is required under the EA. You can't do Office Standard, and so that's the requirement in this case. Windows Thin PC, my new favorite. This is where you can actually create virtual thin clients in the Windows 7 environment. And the part that I think is the coolest is you can do that by utilizing old fat clients or old desktops or laptops. Old hardware, instead of buying new thin client machines, Microsoft has now given you the ability to basically take a Windows 7 embedded license and put it and utilize old hardware. I think from doing some research, the minimum requirement here is about 1 gig of memory, but it allows you to also lock out the hard drive, and it would basically function as a thin client. Again, this is another qualification of Windows OS covered with software assurance. And enhanced consulting. These are new options for redeeming the planning services days. If you had used it before, you know that you did have planning service days or package service days, as they were called before. The new name is now planning service days, and we'll kind of get into some of the changes.
So also, I want to kind of contextualize what these changes mean. I mean, if you look at each of them, and you refer back to that slide where we said what was causing change in the computing environment, and 2 out of the 3 categories happen to be virtualization. All of these new SA benefits that are rolling out in some way, shape, or form pertain to molding Microsoft's licensing within the context of virtualization, right? The VDA gives you the right to access a virtual desktop that you've stood up on a server, and that's something, that license is something you need when you're virtualizing at the desktop level. Office roaming, same thing, gives you the ability to access your Office, your Project, your Visio content from a third-party device when it's served up on a virtual desktop. Windows Thin PC, again, is for clients who are, creating virtual thin clients from older hardware, from legacy hardware, but they don't want to have to create an XP boot image to turn those machines on. So they give you a simpler way to keep your whole environment under Windows 7. So all these changes are relative to accommodating Microsoft's licensing to virtualization, and that's important because that's a trend we've seen over the years where when Microsoft makes changes, they're not necessarily changing the underlying EULA of those licenses. What they're changing is the software assurance benefits package that goes around that. So one of the risk factors we look for in analytics is how are you to when Microsoft makes changes to the way software assurance affects the license entitlement? Having software assurance reduces the risk that Microsoft's going to roll out some change that accommodates some new technology strategy that you happen to be a part of, and then if you're not under software assurance, you're going to miss out on that benefit, and now you're stuck with the old licensing model when your computing environment has changed. So we always caution customers, when you're thinking about the value proposition of software assurance, understand that ever since the release of Windows 2003 R2, Microsoft has been embedding positive changes into the software assurance bundle rather than necessarily changing the underlying structure of the licenses. So that's why these are clear indications of that direction continuing over the next that have happened over the last 18 months. All right.
Real quick question, Cynthia. Does Windows VDA, does this cover WISE or thin client devices?
The answer is no. You've just identified the one licensing gotcha in the Windows desktop environment. The licenses that you buy through a volume license program are upgrade licenses and always upgrade licenses. The only way to get a full license of Windows 7, say, is through box product or OEM when you buy a new piece of hardware. So those licenses that you have are upgrade licenses. They assume that the machine to which they're assigned contains an OEM, a full copy of Windows OEM Professional. Since the WISE Thin client does not contain that upgrade license doesn't apply. Ergo, the Windows VDA subscription that comes with the software assurance on that Windows license also does not apply. So if you're rolling out true thin clients, but you're reconciling them as Windows desktops, be very careful about that, because in a lot of cases, those licenses that you have through volume licensing do not apply to thin clients because they don't have an underlying qualifying upgrade. So long answer, short answer is no, those licenses don't qualify for the VDA. You would still have to buy that VDA subscription separately for the WISE Thin clients.
Okay, so we have 3 more questions in the queue.
Okay.
We may run over, so I just want to let people know who are listening in. We're going to try to get to these questions and then try to wrap up.
Okay. And also, we wanted to mention we did upload the slide deck. If you go up in the top right corner, you see the documents sitting there. There's 3 pages. If you click on that, you should be able to actually download, and you can all have the actual full presentation that we gave you today. All the contact information is there. We know there's a lot of content here, and there's also a lot of questions. So we're going to try.
There's also a resource list at the end of this deck that we won't get to today, but it's got that you can download it. It's got links for more details on ECI, EAP. It's got a lot of recommended links for bedtime reading.
Next question is from Mark. Can you elaborate on the remote virtual desktop for Project at Visio?
So what roaming rights gives you the right to do is it's a little bit confusing in the sense that it gives you the right to access virtually Office and Project and Visio content from what they call a third-party device. There's several interpretations of what third-party means. The calculus we generally use is if you own the device, then if you have Office under software assurance and they're consuming a virtual desktop and they're logging in from some other system, from something other than their primary work PC, and you don't own that resource that they're logging into, the Office roaming rights apply. This gets into where this gets really tough is when you start looking at Droid slates, at iPads, at non-Windows OS devices where people are remoting in to access Office content. Sometimes it comes down to who owns that iPad as to whether or not that iPad requires an Office license or not. So that's another topic. I'll give you, if you have a Gartner subscription, Gartner published an excellent article on how do you license iPads. Same rules would apply for Droid slates, but how do you accommodate the licensing for those in your environment? There's an awesome Gartner article on there. Email me and I can send you the Gartner article number if you're a Gartner subscriber.
Okay, and the last question before we try to finish up here. When do the new SA benefits kick in? Do they apply if you already are in a 3-year EA agreement? Jim, if you go into your VLSC site, you should actually see all those changes. They happen, and they happen in real time. So once they create them and they go into place, everybody who has active SA gets those changes. So they should be on your site.
Yeah, all the benefits that we just listed are all active. A couple of them are about a year old, and some of them came out in July of this year, but they're all currently in place today for active software assurance customers.
As far as planning services, what we have on the screen here listed out are actually all of the planning services that are available now. You remember before this was limited to a few certain categories. They really have expanded this. And this accounts for you to be able to bring in a Microsoft partner to basically help you get your desktop deployment, your SharePoint, your public cloud. You can see all the categories on the screen. This is Microsoft's way of saying, hey, we hear you. We know that you have, you wanted some help getting these technologies that you're purchasing rolled out. So they've kind of answered with this. And these are actually paid days from Microsoft to the partner to be able to help you get these things set up and lined up. So take time to invest a little bit of time and research these and be able to see what some of the changes and maybe how they can help you. And the question from Deborah, how long does SA last after you purchase a Microsoft license with SA? If you buy it under any of the opens, so if it's open business, you buy SA, it's a 2-year program. Anywhere from open value, select, and EA, SA lasts 3 full years. You can choose under open value and select to do it in annual payments, or you can pay up front for all 3 years as you choose. If you decide not to make one of those payments, obviously your SA stops at that point. Enterprise agreement is always 3 years at a time.
All right, so real quick, just some things that we've observed in the last 12 months. Number one, Office 365. Customers are thinking about it, asking questions, and looking for numbers. The Office 365 value proposition is highly nuanced. So if you're thinking about it, the only way to really understand it is let's get in there and let's run some hard numbers. Let's look at some scenarios. It's definitely something where if you just look at sort of the out-of-the-box Office 365, the pricing may shock you. It may look high, but then when you really start nuancing it for your organization, those costs rapidly come down and become affordable. So it's one of those things where, you know, looks can be deceiving with Office 365, and it's not something that you can roll into and say, you know, just show me some pricing scenarios, because it's highly nuanced to what you're doing with email, what you're doing with SharePoint, what you're doing with Link, how do you interact with Office. So Office 365 is Microsoft's most complex program ever, but it's also their most flexible and has the most opportunity for saving money. System Center 2012, everybody that I know that's in the know says this is going to be a good product release set. Better integration, tighter integration. System Center is advancing ever closer to Microsoft's vision of a single pane of glass. So I would encourage you to take a look at System Center 2012. The people that we know that are in the know are saying good things. Lastly, Forefront. Again, I'll just leave it at that. It's, you know, it's also worth a look. They're doing some really exciting things with Forefront. And lastly, iPad Droid Slates. They sneak into your environment, you know, but they have licensing impact. So if you have iPads and you have Droid Slates in your environment, it's worth it to take some time out to look at the licensing implications, because we're seeing a lot of that where people are, you know, they've adopted a large number of these, unaware of the licensing implications, and those are situations that can escalate. So we want to make sure that, you know, if you're rolling out Droid Slates and iPads, that you have a good idea of what you're in for the licensing.
Okay. This is the resource list that Lane spoke about. We've got some links on here to give you some general information, and obviously the most important part of this, I apologize. Sorry, I cut that out too quick. Is here we go. It'll be coming back up in a second. Remember, contact Softmart. If you have an account manager, contact the account manager. If not, analytics@softmart.com. We'll be able to answer any questions you have. And I know we've run over here. We really appreciate everyone's patience. Again, on behalf of myself, Jack Dillman, Lane Shelton, and Dana Holden, who's here with us, who's been helping answer your questions. Thank you so much for your time, and hope you got something out of it. Thank you.
And this concludes today's conference. We thank you for your participation.